Truly amazing things can happen on even very ordinary days. That special night, it all began with a girl who always had her head stuck inside a book. She loved monsters, robots, and battles, but she was ready to find a new story. Luckily, she was on her way to my bookstore. Opened it to find drawings tucked inside, and they were familiar. I felt memories begin to stir inside me when an old photograph fell out from between the pages. It had been torn in two, and it showed a young girl in ragged old-fashioned clothes. I knew her, didn't I? Was it my old eyes, or did the girl in the picture have the same expression as the girl before me? I brewed some tea and decided that I was going to tell her a story, a robot story, about my friend, the girl in the photograph. The memories were swarming inside my head. I was up on the city rooftops and police were chasing. I ran as fast as I could, and still they came after me. Together, nothing could spoil those days, it seemed. We had no idea what lay just around the corner. We played and laughed and ate together like a new little family. To earn my keep, I would help around the house and garden. As her birthday was soon, and as I was such a brilliant thief, naturally I would teach her to steal a cake. And so, one day, we returned to the city. Was caught trying to steal that cake. I was led away, and there was nothing she could do. It wasn't even a very big cake. The soldiers were angry with me, but they had more important things to think about. The army was setting up lines of defense. Invaders were coming. Then came the distant roar of aircraft and tanks and the deathly tramp of metal feet. But my friend didn't leave me. She was determined to come to my rescue. Put on camera like that in just that moment, bursting into that poor couple's wedding photo shoot. It froze that instant forever. It was our happiest moment, right before everything changed. Sirens wailed and planes crammed the skies with a dreadful noise. The Robot King's army had arrived, and bombing began. Who knew that war could start so quickly and so horribly? Celebrate her birthday, but we made the best of it. I tried to keep up her spirits. Everything would be fine. We'd survive. Her grandpa would be okay. I'd even managed to save the cake. We could hear the noise of bombs. The city was under siege by a merciless enemy. But eventually it became quiet. What would we find up there? And it was all down to the Robot King. People stared at the Red Folk. They started treating them differently. At first they muttered under their breath, and sometimes they said hateful things. The Red Folk were no good. Now it was all right to say this out loud. Where did these thoughts come from? Suddenly they were out in the open. I looked at my friend, and she was no different to the girl I knew she'd always been. But she was scared. We needed to get back to her grandpa, who was all alone. We were terrified. Her grandpa's house was a ruin, but the old man was waiting. He was so glad to see us again. And even if our reunion lasted only a few hours, it was precious to us. Until the door was kicked in. Robot soldiers, unyielding, vicious, completely emotionless, went about their mindless task. Then one of them took a gun and trained it on her grandpa. The robot shot him, but the ray didn't kill him. It just turned him deep red. Now, both of them were Red Folk. The soldiers bundled them into a truck and drove off, taking them somewhere new to live, a place known as the ghetto. Me? The soldiers had no interest in what became of me. So I ran to grab my scooter. I knew I must give chase. I had to help her. What else could I do? We listened to news about the wider world. and none of it seemed good. This was how the Robot King had decreed life must be, and the robot soldiers made sure the red folk couldn't go through the new wall or ever leave the ghetto. But we still found ways to play and be happy. We went over to the orphanage, where there were loads of kids who'd been separated from their parents. Now they had Janusz to look after them. Janusz was a kindly older man with a woolly beard and round glasses. They knew they were safe to play, because he would always be there for them, whatever happened. Could build a robot disguise out of bits of old junk. A fake robot so good it could actually convince all the other robots. Why, we even managed to infiltrate the rocket that flew up to the Dark Tower where all the precious medicines were hoarded. What an amazing adventure that was. You think it's far-fetched, do you? You think it's unlikely us kids could build a robot disguise out of bits and bobs? You don't believe we'd be brave enough to go over the wall and into the Forbidden Zone? Well, perhaps I do exaggerate some details, but we were brave indeed, and we did our very best to steal the drugs. The orphans in Janusz's care needed the medicine very badly. We'd stolen. Triumph! Success! Janusz was delighted with us. Many lives would be saved. He told the nurse, Irena, to administer the medicines at once. She had taken note of our bravery and thought we might be useful to the resistance. You see, Irena was involved in smuggling children, 2 or 3 at a time, through the wall to safety in the outside world. It was extremely dangerous. She hid kids in crates and sacks and even coffins, sneaking them under the electronic noses of the robot guards. Discovery would have meant instant death for them all. When winter came, she told the girl and I that it was time for us to embark upon a mission. A very artistic kind of mission. Posters going up everywhere in the ghetto. They proclaimed the wickedness of the robots and told everyone how soulless they were. This wasn't the way things were supposed to be, the posters said. But times were getting even harder behind the wall. Every day there was less to eat. Then came rumors of a great supply of free food. Surely it couldn't be true. But the rumors went on getting more persistent. Yes, anyone could go to this place and eat as much as they liked. All trapped and carried off. The Robot King had tricked everyone. I had disguised myself as one of the red folk. I wanted to be just the same as my friend. Whatever her fate was, I wanted to share it. The train sailed through the night skies, taking all us red folk far away from our homes. There was a place it was taking us to, a camp that the Robot King had created for us all. As the engine went haywire, and then, kaboom! It exploded and hot shards of metal flew everywhere. There were enough escape pods for the others. We helped them parachute down to Earth, but there were no pods left for us. Soon we were falling, screaming, towards the ground. We were somewhere deep in the countryside. There was a homely-looking cottage. The old couple who lived there were both wearing black and white. Our red clothes stood out a mile, and we worried they'd turn us in. But they brought us indoors. They showed us to their attic and gave us a meal. But we couldn't help thinking about her grandpa at home. He wasn't safe and warm at that moment. The next day, the old couple were concerned as they waved us off. We were returning to the city for her grandpa, facing almost certain death. And we were alone, underground, hiding away from the horrible noises above. What was going on up there? Though the odds were terrible, the people fought back, even though some said it was hopeless and much too late. Their weapons were puny compared with their oppressors, but their spirits hadn't been totally crushed. They fought on, but there was no escape in the end. the last of the red folk were rounded up and taken away. We heard terrible noises as we squeezed through the sewers. I heard the full story much later. I also heard that there was truth in the old rumors we'd heard of the people beyond the wall, people who could change your color. We found the little girl and she told us her tale. She used to live in the orphanage where Janusz was in charge, and he had stayed right there with the kids as he had promised. When the robots came to take them away, he refused to leave their side. He held their hands as they all stood together. Then the robot guards led them all away. Even though the resistance could have saved Janusz, even though he could have escaped, he kept his promise. And he went along with the children into the flying train. It took off, and none of them were ever seen again. But this little girl, she was the only one who got away. And now she was talking about a couple on the other side of the wall. Somehow she knew that if she could get to them, they would adopt her and perhaps change her color. Then she would be safe. Her eyes brimmed with hopeful tears as she said, maybe they would adopt you too as well. My friend, part of their lives. I was so glad for her. She would be safe at last in the world beyond the wall. But there was only room for one child. So it was time for the two of us to part. We had come through so much together. She took out the photograph of the two of us, the one that had been taken on the last day before the invasion. She tore it in two, so we'd both have half, to remind us of each other. Then she went away, and I never saw her again. After that, I had many more adventures, of course, but that is all a story for another time, perhaps. And maybe one day, I told the girl in my bookstore, you will hear it, my dear. She was looking at me, thunderstruck. I've heard that story before, she said, about the girl and the boy and the photograph from my grandma. Downstairs, the shop doorbell rang. There was some kind of magic at work, perhaps. Magic that brought her grandmother to my door that very night. We went downstairs, and I saw her waiting. At first, I froze. The girl pushed me closer, and then I recognized my friend. We hugged, and all that time simply dropped away. After all the adventures and the changes that everyone must face, we were the same two kids all over again. That's what I mean when I say life can still surprise us on even very ordinary days. And now my story is done. I dedicate it to anyone who's been forced to part from their loved ones, and who has survived long enough to see them again.